All right, so the first story I want to talk to you about today is a little bit of nerd news. I don't know if you've been following the ongoing saga, which is being known as OGL 1.1. And so let me just back up and give all the context that I need to give, and then I'm going to explain my take and kind of give you some context about what's going on. So Dungeons and Dragons is a popular role-playing game, the fifth edition of which is considered, quote, the most popular role-playing game. I don't have the stats on. I'm just going to roll with that for now. I'm also a player of Dungeons and Dragons. I really love it. I have two groups that I play with. But there was Dungeons and Dragons is not its own company. It's owned by another company called Wizards of the Coast. Dungeons and Dragons is not the only game that Wizards of the Coast makes. They have a bunch of board games and other role-playing games that they own. Now, Wizards of the Coast is owned by another company that you're probably much more familiar with, Hasbro. And they make board games, toys, all sorts of stuff. And so Wizards of the Coast has this agreement with third-party creators. And you used to have this agreement, and it was called the Open Gaming License. That's what OGL stands for, 1.0a. And it says a lot of things, but ultimately what it says is if you create a module or an adventure or something else, you can brand it D&D and you can sell it, and Wizards of the Coast is not going to collect any royalties from it. You are set to sell that and make a living off of that, and that's totally okay. We're just kind of appreciative that you're advertising D&D, and that people will actually go in and buy the books and buy the official modules and things like that, which makes Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro lots of money. And by the way, these companies are doing well and have continued to do well. But a couple months ago, Wizards of the Coast decided that they were going to revoke Open Gaming License 1.0a. And it's an interesting thing about that because there's actually some good contract language in there that makes it seem as if that it is irrevocable. So that's kind of the first problem. The second problem is really what comes afterwards. And so there were drafts of what 1.1 was going to look like. And the drafts that came out, the leaks as it were, looked pretty bad for these third-party content creators, and essentially said, "Hey, we're gonna steal everything that you have, or we're going to collect large royalties on it, and say that you can't advertise it as D&D, or you can't advertise it as D&D." And so, this created a problem for lots of people who have kind of made their livelihoods doing this. And so the real question is, why is this happening, right? And I'm going to get to that a little bit, but there was a large backlash from the community, and it's actually quite interesting because Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm going to refer to as D&D, I don't want to keep saying it, D&D has an online subscription platform that Wizards of the Coast owns. It's called D&D Beyond, and essentially it allows you to have all the rule books and your game and whatever, but all virtually, and you can buy it in the virtual store and all that good stuff. And so the players and the content creators reacted. So several people were saying that they were going to sue Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. Lots of individual players were canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, which generates money for Wizards of the Coast. And so we're starting to see that the market has reacted to this, right? And so Wizards seems to have played their cards incorrectly in this sense. And just today, actually, there was some commentary from Wizards of the Coast, and they're releasing a 1.2. Now, I haven't had the time to read through the entire document, but it does seem promising. But ultimately, this entire saga could have been avoided if Wizards of the Coast had just left 1.0a on its own, right? There was no good reason, and I use good reason in that context for a very specific reason, because the reasons they gave were pretty weak. The first reason they said was the license was being revoked so that no discriminatory content was created created from the game. To which I say, was anyone doing that? The second reason they gave was, oh, well, we want to prevent people from using Dungeons and Dragons for things like NFTs and crypto-based games. And again, I ask, was anybody doing that? Look, there's something you all should know. I work in the risk world as well as being a privacy lawyer. And in the world of risk, you actually have to have a risk before you can apply a fix to it. You can't apply a fix to a non-existent risk. So if Wizards comes out there and says, hey, well, we want to prevent these things, you actually need to give some substance as to, like, is this happening? Could this reasonably happen? Have you seen people moving in that direction? That's why you're acting now. Has it happened in other genres that you've seen and preempted? You got to give something, and they just didn't. The answers were woefully. The response that Wizards gave was woefully inadequate, and so the backlash was fairly swift. So I said I would get back to why this is happening, and I'm here. So capitalism ruins everything. Ben, that seems like a very large leap. Okay, hear me out. The primary thing that changed between 1.0a and 1.1 was an addition of royalties. The only reason you would add royalty clauses to the contracts that you have with third-party creators is to make more money. And so this is either someone at the top of Wizards or someone at the top of Hasbro saying, we need to make more money off of Dungeons and Dragons. We can't just allow people to enjoy this thing. We have to say, we have to find new ways to make more money. We have to make more profit. We have to generate more profit for our shareholders. By the way, Wizards and Hasbro, publicly traded companies, their CEOs are required to generate more money for shareholders. Their board is required to generate more money for shareholders, right? Ultimately, this is how the world goes around, and unfortunately, D&D is getting caught up in this. Now, this saga is far from over, and I actually think that if Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast were interested in some of the objectives that they claim they were, which again, I don't believe them, I actually think there's better ways to go about it, right? So an interesting comparison, additional nerd stuff. If you were kind of conscious during the time when Disney had bought Star Wars and LucasArts and Lucasfilm and all that good stuff, then you probably noticed that there was an interesting kind of change of posture about the Star Wars universe. So Disney came in and they said, hey, everything that was labeled Star Wars up until this point, other than the movies and the things that LucasArts and Lucasfilm produced, no longer canon, right? You can't call it, you can't say that it's part of the Star Wars universe as we are creating it. You can still have it out there. That's fine. We're not going to touch anything that's done in the past and whatever. But from now on, we give exclusive rights to what can be called Star Wars, right? Hasbro or Wizards could have done that. Could have said, hey, everything that's out there now and all content that isn't generated commercially, which is to say that people generating things on their own and then selling them for a small fee or giving them away, that's all fine and kosher. However, for big organizations that, or organizations that make over a certain amount of money per year, from now on, you need to pay us some amount of royalties for the usage of the D&D name and the D&D system and so on and so forth. By the way, the other thing they could have done is just do exactly what they did, but instead of have the royalties be 25%, which is totally ridiculous, they could have lowered it to something like 2%. Because truthfully, what happens with a lot of these things is that there's not a huge group of content creators out there who make decent sums of money. You could ask them to pay into a system where they license it. Now, I'm not saying that they'd be thrilled with that, but if you were looking to make more money, you could have done it incrementally. You could have taken smaller approaches. You could have taken the Disney method. There are lots of ways they could have done this. The reason it comes down to capitalism because it's all about greed. How much money can we make right now? How can, in the short term, we squeeze as much as possible out of the people who are already invested? And the way that you do that is either increase revenues or lower costs, right? It's the only two ways in capitalism that you have to make more profits. And so what Hasbro and Wizards decided was that they were going to really double down on the increasing revenues idea. And it just truly is so painful to watch because, as I mentioned earlier, D&D 5e is 5th edition is the most popular role-playing game. I mean, it probably was when this whole saga started. Ultimately, you're destroying your brand. This is such short-term thinking. This is such a capitalist move to squeeze in the short term and sacrifice for the long term. And I just think it's absolutely what they're doing with a game that so many people know and love, and by the way, have played for generations. Dungeons and Dragons isn't new. It came out in the 70s. And by the way, the 20-sided dice and systems that play with fancy dice, they go back to Roman times. So it's not like Wizards invented this, or Gary Gygax invented this, who's founder of D&D. So this is a really bad move for Hasbro and Wizards. I really hope that at the end of this saga, whenever it ends, we get to an open gaming license that respects the content creators. And if the objectives that Hasbro and Wizards are talking about are real, let's give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit here. But ultimately, you need to go into it clear-eyed, and you need to understand what the community is looking for. When your entire brand is based on your community and the free advertising from podcasts and all the good that content creators do, chucking them under the bus is a terrible long-term strategy. And actually, I have a message here at the end for our content creators. There have been a lot of messages going around about, hey, we should all just say we're never going to create for Dungeons and Dragons ever again. And that's how we're going to show them. I think you miscalculated there, guys. And let me tell you why. The whole point of the open gaming license is to kick out as many people as possible who aren't going to play ball, keep the people in who are going to maximize profit for Wizards and Hasbro. So if you, as an organizing block, I mean, I don't know how organized this community is in terms of the creators, but let's say they are, right? Let's call them an organizing block. Again, benefit of the doubt. If you say that you're going to leave the table and never come back, then the other side has no incentive to negotiate with you, right? If, on the other hand, you say, hey, we're thinking about leaving and never coming back, but we have a bespoke set of conditions and we're more than happy. We're more than happy to come back if yada yada, right? Then there is at least some incentive on the part of Hasbro to actually come back to the table and say, hey, we recognize we're losing here. We will negotiate in good faith. So, I hope that this, obviously, I hope this gets resolved amicably. I really hope that it just kind of goes back to the way things used to be. I think that was pretty solid for everyone involved. Lots of people play D&D. D&D is making tons of money for Wizards and Hasbro. There's a major motion picture coming out. I know I'm excited, and lots of other nerds are excited for Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. So it could have been a really good year for Dungeons and Dragons, for D&D, but it's not going to be now because of this. So creators, don't say you're leaving and they're coming back, because they won't negotiate with you. Hasbro, Wizards, come on, guys, what are you doing here? Don't destroy the brand in the long term for a couple bucks in the short term. It's really not worth it. Don't just get yours and close the door behind you. I know that's what capitalism tells you to do, but if you want more money overall, you need to stick it out for a long-term strategy.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.